Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pixelist. I'm Will, and today is a glorious day. Season 2 of The Legend of Vox Machina is finally here, and I could not be more excited. In today's video, we're going to be going over all the details and Easter eggs that you might have missed from episode 1. But before we roll initiative, let me give a quick spoiler warning. The show's based on a D&D campaign, and if you haven't seen that campaign, then aspects of what I'm covering here could spoil Season 2. With that out of the way, let's get into it. All right, well, first things first, we have the Ember Seed, or that stone embedded in Thordak's chest. Now, I'm sure we'll learn more about this as the season progresses, but that is what initially allowed Allura and her allies to imprison Thordak in the elemental plane of fire back in the day when they first fought him. Next up, we've got a couple of familiar faces. These two NPCs in the back here, if you recall, actually showed up in Season 1 during the Feast at Amon. Now, there's actually a whole lot of overlap in NPCs between that scene and this one here, which just makes sense. But I'm only going to call attention to these two because they were played by Matt and Marisha, and we actually see their untimely end just a little bit later. So unfortunately, they won't be making it to Season 3. Next up, we have Vex's primeval awareness going off. Now, if you recall, this happened in Season 1 as well, and it actually happens again a bit later in this episode. But what it is just her ranger ability that lets her sense certain types of creatures when they are nearby. In this case, obviously dragons. Speaking of dragons, let's move on to the main event. But before we do, special shout out to this NPC, who I couldn't help but notice looks like an older, divorced Scanlan that just really let himself go. We salute you. Moving on to the Chroma Conclave. I love the design of these dragons. They all feel so unique, and Titmouse just did a fantastic job. So let's take a look at each of them real quick. First up, we've got Raishan, the diseased deceiver, played by Cree Summer and wielding an absolutely awful poison breath weapon. This is the one that takes out Sovereign Uriel, and he goes quick, but it does seem painful, bleeding out the eyes and everything. But honestly, I would prefer it to this next one, and that is Umbrasyl the Hope Devourer, played by none other than our illustrious DM, Matthew Mercer. Now, Umbrasyl is packing the acid breath weapon, and this is the most horrific of them all, in my opinion. It was literally melting people as it rained down from the sky. No thank you. Up next, we have Vorgal, the Frigid Doom, played by none other than Liam O'Brien, aka our beloved Vax. Now, he has an ice breath weapon that is actually almost equally horrific. People are just like shattering inside of these blocks of ice, and it does not look pleasant. And finally, that leaves us with Thordak, the Cinder King, played by Lance Reddick. What a voice. And packing an absolutely devastating nuclear fire breath weapon, maybe plasma. He kind of goes Godzilla mode. This whole sequence was nothing short of epic, and of course, it was just incredible to see in full glorious animation Thordak level the Cloud Top District and create what will become the future scar of the Cinder King. Alrighty, now that we've properly introduced the band, allow me to backtrack and hit a couple of the details from the siege itself. First and foremost, we have Allura being an absolute badass, casting a few spells during this combat. And quick disclaimer, it's not as if they're sitting in the writer's room with the player's handbook, frantically trying to figure out how to perfectly depict magic missile. So I think the spells in the show maybe didn't even have a specific spell, that they were trying to emulate, but it's still fun to guess what it might be, right? So here, I think Allura is casting Globe of Invulnerability in order to protect the Sovereign's family and, some of the other members of the Tal'Dorei Council here. Awesome moment, of course. And then after this, we have her casting what I believe could be Hold Creature or Hold Monster in order to, try to restrain Umbrasyl. It doesn't work, but it does bring him a little bit closer down to earth, which I think was intentional because then we have Kima coming up for the assist, using what I guess would be Divine Smite. Now, rules lawyers might be telling me, hey, Divine Smite's only melee, dummy. But refer to what I just said. And Kima's a paladin, so what's more paladin than Divine Smite? All right, next up we have one of the first major departures from the original campaign. Now, if I sat in this video and talked about every single minute difference between the campaign and this TV show, this video's probably already long runtime would be exponentially longer. So I'm only going to point out changes that are impactful, more than just, for cutting time or, common sense changes, right? And the first one of those is here, where Vax is seeing the Matron of Ravens for the first time. Now, if you've seen the campaign, you know this is a bit early for him to be interacting with this entity. But this is the type of change that I think just really makes sense. Um, when you have the benefit of the doubt of knowing the entire storyline, since they didn't when they were, actively creating this D&D campaign, I think it just makes sense when you're converting it to a TV show to interject some foreshadowing into the narrative, which I think that's exactly what this is. And I think it's so cool. Again, knowing what we know about the full arc of Vax and his storyline, I think it just makes sense that he might be getting glimpses of her before what we know to occur occurs. Sorry for speaking sort of vaguely. I know I gave a spoiler warning, but I'm sure some people still are going to watch this video. So I'm going to still do my best to kind of, hide the lead where I can. Um, but anyway, yeah, I believe she shows up in episode 2. I'll probably talk a little bit more about it there. But just cool to see here. Next up, we can't have Allura stealing all the spellcaster shine because we've got Gilmore putting his skills on full display as we see him casting what I believe to be barrier, but maybe some sort of just generalized shield spell to block Vorgal's Ice Blast. And the cool detail here is that you can see the runes engraved on this barrier, which Gilmore is a rune child in the world of Exandria. So I just thought that was a nice little touch. Next up, we've got the return of the Matt NPC. Now, if you watched my season 1 breakdowns or you're just an eagle-eyed viewer, then you would have noticed this NPC show up in almost, but not every episode of season 1. I'm excited to hunt for him here in season 2. We'll see if he shows up in every episode this time or not. But good to have you back, Matt. Next up, we've got a Raishan scene, and there's a couple interesting things here. First and foremost, I love how they're pivoting Raishan and Keyleth against one another specifically. Given what we know to ultimately happen here, I think this is a great dose of foreshadowing, just like with the Matron of Ravens. Other than that, though, when Grog runs up and breaks his axe, this moment is directly inspired by a moment from the campaign, 19 Misses.
Run up to the dragon and hack away.
All right, make your strikes.
All right. In hell. Where's that son of a bitch? 19.
19 misses.
Gosh, it gets me every time, man. I can't believe we're watching a TV show that's based on a D&D campaign. Gotta let it sink in sometimes. Anyway, another cool thing about this moment is that it was shown in the trailer for season 2, but accompanying it was a line from Grog saying, Vox Machina,
Fuck! Shit!
while he was raging out. But now that we've seen the episode, there's no voice line there. So that voice line has to be from the kill box. And those of you that have seen the campaign know exactly what I'm talking about. Very, very sneaky Critical Role. Alrighty, y'all, we've officially arrived. My biggest stretch of the episode. This, for all intents and purposes, probably wasn't an intended Easter egg, but I'm still going for it because I want to share this clip. But Percy's arm getting melted by Umbrasil's acid rain. 1, brutal, but 2, made me just think of something that happens later in the campaign. I'm not going to give any details because I don't want to give any contextual spoilers. But there's this moment where something happens to Percy's arm, and it's quite unfortunate. So the same thing doesn't happen, but I'm just can't help but wonder if this is maybe a subtle nod to that.
Out of nowhere, 5 bugbears come charging out of a hallway, grab and tear off Percy's arm.
Oh! Yeah! Oh no! Oh no!
Oh, where did that... I'll put these back.
Oh no!
See, wasn't that fun to include? Thank you for humoring me. Anyways, that brings us to Pike casting Cure Wounds on Percy's arm, getting them all in tip-top shape. She actually casts this again later on Gilmore, and it's just iconic cleric stuff. I mean, not just cleric, but healer. You know what I mean. All right, next up, amidst all the chaos and destruction, we get a shot of these banners that are hanging in Amon. Now, this was actually in season 1 as well, but I figured it was worth mentioning here too. All the symbols on there are actually the dice you use playing tabletop RPGs. So, fun little nod. Next up, we get the classic trope of arch enemies turned friends as Grog utilizes a door for good and protects them from Thordak's blast. I think Vex even calls this out specifically during the episode, so this isn't one that probably many people missed, but Vox Machina and doors have a tumultuous relationship, so it's good to see them doing some good together. Next up, we've got a blink and you miss it moment where we get the return of an NPC from season 1. specifically the Tavern Keeper from Season 1. And the fun thing about this NPC is that the fans actually had a hand in creating them. So cool to see them show up again. Next up, we have this wide shot of Amon, and I might be reaching here. You guys are going to have to let me know. But I couldn't help but notice that central gash in the middle of the now destroyed Amon, quite reminiscent of the Ember Seed within Thordak's own chest. Next, we have the crew headed to Gilmore's, and there's a lot of great stuff here. First and foremost, we have Vax and Gilmore's scenes and interactions, and this is just great, just in and of itself, but also I think it's going to be really nice in how it sets up a moment later this season with the Rakshasa, which I'm not confirmed, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see. Next up, what is this? A shopping episode? We have Vox Machina combing through the ruins of Gilmore's shop and picking up a number of things. Starting with Vex picking up some arrows that look like explosive arrows, but it looks like there's a few different kinds there. So we might get to see later in the season exactly what she gets here. But then we have Grog picking up the Belt of Dwarven Kind, which I'll speak later on that in the following episode. Then we have Vax picking up some sort of little package, little satchel that I'm not sure what it is. I know there's been a few guesses around, but nothing's really been concrete as far as I'm concerned. But I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments of what specific item this is, if anything. Following that, we have Pike picking up a vial of holy water. And finally, we have this shot of Percy looking at the dragon lance that made an appearance in Season 1. And I think it's just funny they called back to this, especially since, a dragon lance would be quite helpful right now. Alrighty, there's actually one more item to talk about, but I wanted to dive a bit deeper on it, and that is Scanlan and the broom. Now, if you recall, the same broom showed up in Season 1 in Gilmore's shop, and I pointed it out in that Easter egg breakdown, but I didn't think it was going to be the literal broom that eventually Vex gets. Turns out it is. This change makes sense, because in the original campaign, Vex stole the broom from Gurn Blanston, a guest character played by Chris Hardwick. Now, there's a number of reasons they could make this change, and we won't really get into it, but I think it's way cleaner, and for the sake of, cutting down on unimportant things in order to make this fit a tight narrative, this all makes sense. But I'm excited to see how this goes from Scanlan's hands to Vex's, especially after how much fun has been made of the broom so far. Next, I want to call attention to the shot we get of Grog putting everyone's items away in the bag of holding. There was a similar shot of this in Season 1, so it's nothing new, but I just appreciate it. As when you're using a fantasy show like this, a lot of the times common sense is thrown out of the window for how people are carrying things around. But in D&D, we have the perfect solution, so I'm glad they take the time to actually show it in action. All right, from here, we get them teleporting out of Gilmore's via this teleportation crystal, and we get this awesome shot of him doing so. And that leads us to Grayskull Keep. And my favorite little detail here is that Trinket is standing out front, probably nervous as heck, noticing all the chaos going around and knowing that he is not with Vex and everyone else. So I just love him standing out front like a little guard, like, trying to do whatever he can. Alrighty, next up is actually my favorite Easter egg of the entire video. But before we get there, since I've got you trapped, I just wanted to say thank you if you've made it this far in the video. We're a really small channel, only 1,000 subscribers, so all the engagement means a lot to us. Typical YouTuber spiel, likes, comments, subscribes. If you enjoyed this video and you wanted to share it, that would be amazing. We want to keep making more content like this, and hopefully we can continue to grow and do so. So really appreciate it. And back to the regularly scheduled programming. So, my favorite Easter egg. In Grayskull Keep, we actually see this banner behind Grog. And it's depicting a saga, if you will, of Grog, the Nymph, and the Nightmare. The Nightmare is the demonic horse in the background. And then the Nymph has her arms around Grog, and they are holding something, which I believe to be the Nymph's heart. Now, this is from the campaign technically, but not actually from the live stream content. This is a story that happened in their home game before they ever started streaming on Twitch, and it's actually covered in some of their comic series. But this was just such a cool thing to notice, and I had my eyes peeled because in Season 1, similarly, there was some hidden details in banners in the keep. So I figured there might be something. Really glad there was. All right, following this, we have Vorugal approaching Grayskull Keep after the refugees have arrived and starts to cause some havoc. We have a quick scene of Scanlan trying to use an illusion to trick it, just like he did Brimscythe. But Vorugal uses some ability here. Maybe it's True Sight. Maybe it's just representative of him not failing the wisdom saving throw. It could be any number of things, but cool nonetheless. Next, we've got Keyleth using her transport via plant spell again this season. I imagine we might be seeing a lot of this one. And this is to get all the refugees and Vox Machina out of Grayskull Keep into the safety of Whitestone. An interesting attention to detail here that I loved is that when we first see all these refugees arrive at Grayskull Keep, these two orphans are alone, and in the background you can notice a mother with two of her own children. Here in the follow-up shot of only a handful of survivors having made it to Whitestone, we see those two orphans now with that same mother who no longer has her children. Devastating, but again, just cool detail that they're paying attention to in the background. Speaking of survivors, we have one that sticks out like a sore thumb. Grog calls attention to this verdant, green-eyed girl with eyes quite similar to another character we know. Yes, I believe this is our first official Larkin sighting. Keep your eyes on this. I think it'll be very interesting to see how they play with this season, since it's going to clearly be a bit different from the campaign. And I'll speak more on this in future episodes. And of course, you know I had to give a special shout out to my boy Ruidus here. If you're watching Campaign 3, then I'm sure your eyes perked up when you saw this as well. And if you are watching Campaign 3, we put out a podcast every week discussing the latest episodes, so would love for you to come on that journey with us. This next scene starts with a map, and there's just a fun couple of details here. On the map, we can see Westerin, which is the city in a way where Vox Machina began. That is the first proper city that they went to in their home campaign of D&D before ever becoming a Twitch stream. And then a bit to the north, we have Craghammer, which is where the Twitch stream picks up. So it's kind of fun to see both of those cities given a little bit of a shout out there. And next we have them gathered around this table, talking about what the next move should be. And like I said, gathered around a table, they all have drinks, and there are technically mini figures on the table. So to me, this screams D&D, whether an intentional illusion or not, you tell me. But this is also a good chance to talk about Scanlan. As he jumps up on the table here, he's just voicing his concerns and his hesitancies about fighting these dragons at all. And there's been a few moments of characters kind of dismissing Scanlan, and we'll talk more about this in later episodes. But I think all of this is just some great seeds being planted for what's ultimately to come in the Bard's Lament, for those of you that have seen Campaign 1. I don't think we'll be getting that this season, but all the better to be planting it right now. And of course, what's fun here is that who gets him out of this? Well, partly Grog and the rest of Vox Machina, but it's the two orphans that are, enamored with Vox Machina for having slain the dragons. And what's funny is these characters are voiced by Sam's real-life children. And finally, for the last Easter egg of this episode, we have Pike running through the transport via Plant's portal saying, "Last one there is a troll's dick," which this dates back to the very first episode of Campaign 1. Where the party apparently had a troll's dick in their bag of holding. And obviously this was from some shenanigans pre-stream, but it's a recurring joke that's, survived here 7-8 years later. So put a smile on my face to hear that one. And we got a glimpse of the troll's dick, presumably in season 1 as well. So maybe this is something that will show up every season in some form or another. Alrighty, y'all, that's going to do it for episode 1 of season 2 of The Legend of Vox Machina. I'm going to dive into the other episodes now, and hopefully I'll have them up in the next day or so. But I appreciate you sticking with me this far. I've been Will with the Pixelists, and I hope to see you soon.
Is that still in there?
No, we actually got rid of the troll deck.
Oh, okay.
Should we trade the troll dick for something?
I thought we used it as a
I
weapon.
offered it up, and by that time it had turned into like a slimy.
Ew, Val.
It was still
I thought
impressive.
we threw it at somebody.